The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the dusty trading post, and Elizabeth Whitmore stepped down onto the parched earth of Prescott, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1878, with nothing but the worn leather Bible her mother had pressed into her hands 3 months before she died, and the faded calico dress on her back. She had sold everything else to pay for passage west after the Philadelphia textile mill, where she had worked, caught fire, leaving her jobless and desperate enough to answer an advertisement for a mail-order bride placed by a rancher named Thomas Brennan. The air shimmered with heat as she stood alone on the wooden boardwalk, scanning the handful of rough men loitering near the saloon for someone who might be her intended husband. A tall figure detached itself from the shade of an awning across the street, and Elizabeth felt her breath catch as he approached. He was lean and sun-bronzed, with dark hair that brushed his collar and eyes the color of winter sky. He wore dusty chaps over worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. When he stopped in front of her, she noticed the way his gaze traveled from her face to the Bible clutched against her chest and back again. "Miss Whitmore." His voice was rough but not unkind. "Yes." She lifted her chin, trying not to show how frightened she was. "Are you Thomas Brennan?" "No, ma'am, I'm Caleb Stone. I work the neighboring spread." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "Tom Brennan died 2 weeks ago. Rattlesnake got him while he was checking fence lines." The world seemed to tilt beneath Elizabeth's feet. She had traveled 2,000 miles to marry a dead man. She had no money, no family, nowhere to go. The Bible suddenly felt like the only solid thing in the universe, and she pressed it harder against her ribs. "I see." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Thank you for meeting me. I will need to find the stagecoach office to inquire about return passage." "Return passage costs money," Caleb said quietly. "Do you have money?" She met his eyes and saw no mockery there, only a frank assessment of her situation. "No." He was silent for a long moment, studying her face. Then he said something she would remember for the rest of her life. "Faith is a real fine start." She blinked at him. "I beg your pardon," he nodded at the Bible. "You have got faith." That is more than most folks bring to this territory. The preacher is always looking for help at the church. Room and board in exchange for cooking and cleaning. It is not much, but it would give you time to figure out your next step. Relief flooded through her so suddenly that her knees went weak. "That would be most kind. Could you direct me there?" "I will take you." He reached for the carpet bag at her feet, then paused, looking puzzled. "Is this all you have brought? The Bible and the dress I am wearing, that is all I own in this world." Something shifted in his expression, a softening she could not quite name. "Then faith is not just a start for you, it is everything." They walked together through the dusty streets of Prescott, past the saloon where piano music drifted through the swinging doors, past the general store with its painted sign advertising dry goods and mining supplies. The town was rough and raw, buildings thrown up quickly with unpainted lumber, streets rutted from wagon wheels and summer storms. Men far outnumbered women, and Elizabeth felt their curious stares follow her progress. Caleb walked close enough that his shoulder occasionally brushed hers, a silent message to anyone watching that she was under his protection. The church was a simple whitewashed structure at the end of Main Street, with a small house beside it. Caleb knocked on the door of the house, and a middle-aged woman with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes opened it. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Miss Elizabeth Whitmore. She came out to marry Tom Brennan, but she has just learned about his passing. She needs work, and I thought you might have use for her at the church. Mrs. Patterson took in Elizabeth's situation with one comprehensive glance. "Come in, dear child. Mr. Patterson will want to speak with you, but I can tell you right now that we desperately need help. I have been trying to manage the church cleaning, the cooking for the charity meals, and the teaching of the Sunday school children all by myself. Come in, come in." Elizabeth turned to thank Caleb, but he was already settling his hat more firmly on his head, preparing to leave. "Wait," she said impulsively. "I do not even know how to thank you properly." He smiled for the first time, and it transformed his serious face. "No thanks needed, Miss Whitmore. Welcome to Arizona territory." Then he was gone, his boots raising small puffs of dust as he walked back toward the center of town. The next weeks passed in a blur of work. Elizabeth threw herself into her new duties with fierce determination, scrubbing floors until they gleamed, cooking enormous pots of stew for the charity meals the church provided twice a week, teaching the Sunday school children their letters and Bible verses. Reverend Patterson was a gentle, scholarly man who treated her with respect, and Mrs. Patterson became almost a second mother to her. The room they gave her was tiny, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a small table, but it was clean and safe, and Elizabeth counted her blessings every night before she fell into exhausted sleep. She saw Caleb Stone at church every Sunday. He sat in the back pew, hat in hand, listening intently to Reverend Patterson's sermons. Afterward, he always stopped to shake the Reverend's hand and nod politely to Elizabeth. She found herself watching for him during the week, and occasionally she would spot him in town, loading supplies into a wagon or talking with other ranchers outside the bank. He was well respected, she learned from Mrs. Patterson. He had built his ranch from nothing, working as a cowhand for years to save enough money to buy his first 100 acres. Now he ran cattle on land that stretched from the creek to the Red Rock Hills, managing it all by himself with occasional help from drifters passing through looking for work. It was late September when their paths crossed again in a meaningful way. Elizabeth was walking back from the general store with flour and sugar for the church kitchen when 3 rough-looking men stepped out of the alley beside the saloon, blocking her path. "Well, look here," the tallest one said, grinning to show brown teeth. "The preacher's little helper, you are mighty pretty for a church mouse." Elizabeth's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. "Excuse me, gentlemen, I need to pass." "We are not gentlemen, darling." The man reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "But we could show you a real good time if you would just be friendly." "Let go of me." She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Now do not be like that, we just want to talk. The lady asked you to let go." Caleb's voice cut through the air like a blade. He had appeared from nowhere, standing with his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. His face was calm, but his eyes were cold as winter ice. The man holding Elizabeth's arm hesitated, then released her. "We did not mean nothing by it, Stone, just having a little fun. Find your fun somewhere else, move along." The 3 men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Caleb did not move, did not raise his voice, but something in his stance made the decision for them. They backed away, muttering curses under their breath, and disappeared into the saloon. Elizabeth realized she was shaking. The bag of supplies had fallen to the ground, flour dusting the dirt. Caleb bent to pick it up, then gently took her elbow. "Come on, I will walk you back to the church." They walked in silence for half a block before Elizabeth found her voice. "You keep rescuing me." "Somebody needs to. I can take care of myself." He glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "I am sure you can, Miss Whitmore, but out here it is good to have friends watching your back. That is how we survive in this territory." "Are we friends, then?" The question came out before she could stop it. He was quiet for a moment, his hand still steadying her elbow. "I would like to be, if you are willing." Something warm unfurled in Elizabeth's chest. "I would like that too." After that day, Caleb made a point of checking on her when he came to town. He would stop by the church to see if she needed anything, or he would time his errands to coincide with her walks to the general store so he could accompany her. They fell into an easy rhythm of conversation, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, about the years of hard work that had finally given him his own land. She told him about Philadelphia, about the crowded tenements and the dangerous factory work, about her mother's death and the desperate loneliness that had driven her to answer that advertisement. "Do you regret it?" he asked one October afternoon as they sat on the church steps watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "Coming out here, I mean." "It is not what you expected." Elizabeth considered the question carefully. "I thought I would arrive and marry Thomas Brennan and have a ready-made life waiting for me. That did not happen. But I have found something else instead. I have found a purpose, a community and a friend I value very much. So no, I do not regret it." Caleb turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Elizabeth, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I was the one who convinced Tom to place that advertisement. I told him he needed a wife to help build his ranch into something lasting. He was not sure about it, but I pushed him. So in a way, your coming here is my fault. And when I heard he had died and you were arriving anyway, I felt responsible. That is why I met the stagecoach that day." "You felt guilty," Elizabeth said slowly. "At first, yes, but then I got to know you and everything changed." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "Elizabeth Whitmore, you are the bravest, most determined woman I have ever met. You came out here with nothing but a Bible and faith, and you have built a life for yourself through sheer will and hard work. I find myself thinking about you all the time. Wondering if you are safe, if you are happy, and I know it is probably too soon, and I know you have only been here a few months, but I cannot help how I feel." "How do you feel?" she whispered. "Like I want to wake up every morning knowing you are beside me. Like I want to build something lasting with you the way I have built my ranch, piece by piece, day by day. Like I am falling in love with you and I do not want to stop." Joy and terror warred in Elizabeth's heart. She had come west to marry a stranger out of desperation, and she had been grateful when that fate had been avoided. But this was different. This was Caleb, who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. Caleb, whose smile made her pulse race. Caleb, who she had been falling in love with too, though she had barely admitted it to herself. "I am afraid," she admitted. "I do not want to make another desperate decision." "This would not be desperate. This would be a choice, Elizabeth, your choice." He squeezed her hand gently. "I am not asking you to decide right now. I am just telling you what is in my heart. Take all the time you need to figure out what is in yours." Over the following weeks, Elizabeth found that her heart was speaking quite clearly. She looked forward to Caleb's visits with an eagerness that went far beyond friendship. She found excuses to be in town when she knew he would be there. She lay awake at night imagining what it would be like to be his wife, to share his home, to build a life together. And gradually, the fear began to fade, replaced by certainty. It was November, with the first hint of winter in the air, when she told him yes. They were married in the little whitewashed church on a Sunday afternoon, with half the town in attendance. Elizabeth wore a new dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew, soft blue cotton with white lace at the collar. Caleb wore a new shirt and vest, his hair freshly cut, his face solemn as he spoke his vows. When Reverend Patterson pronounced them man and wife, Caleb kissed her gently, his hand cradling her face like she was something precious and fragile. The ranch house was small but well built, with 2 rooms and a loft. Caleb had spent the previous week preparing it for her arrival, adding curtains to the windows and building new shelves in the kitchen. He carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests and set her down carefully in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Stone." Elizabeth looked around at the simple furniture, the stone fireplace, the windows that looked out over rolling land dotted with cattle. "It is perfect." That first night as his wife, Elizabeth discovered that Caleb was as gentle and patient as she had hoped. He took his time with her, making sure she felt safe and cherished, whispering endearments against her skin. And when she finally fell asleep in his arms, she thought that this was what home was supposed to feel like. Not a place, but a person who made you feel like you belonged. The winter passed in a rhythm of hard work and growing intimacy. Elizabeth learned to cook on the wood stove, to churn butter, to help Caleb with the ranch chores when the weather was not too harsh. She learned which pastures to check for straying cattle, how to read the sky for coming storms, how to preserve meat and vegetables for the lean months. Caleb was an excellent teacher, patient with her mistakes and generous with his praise. And at night, in the big bed they shared, they learned each other in ways that had nothing to do with ranching and everything to do with love. Spring brought new challenges. A late frost killed some of their early crops, and they had to replant. Caleb hired 2 drifters to help with the spring roundup, and Elizabeth found herself cooking for 4 instead of 2. The work was exhausting, but she threw herself into it with determination. She had not come all this way and risked everything to fail now. It was during the roundup that the accident happened. One of the hired men, a young fellow named Jimmy, got thrown from his horse and landed badly. Caleb and the other hand carried him back to the house, and Elizabeth saw immediately that his leg was broken. She had no medical training, but she did what she could, remembering things her mother had told her about setting bones. She sent Caleb racing into town for the doctor while she stayed with Jimmy, keeping him calm and comfortable. Dr. Hayes arrived an hour later and confirmed that Elizabeth had set the leg properly. "You have got a natural gift for this, Mrs. Stone," he said as he finished wrapping the splint. "Ever think about learning midwifery? Territory always needs more women with medical knowledge." Elizabeth had not thought about it, but the idea took root in her mind. Over the following weeks, as Jimmy recovered at the ranch and she tended to him, she found herself asking Dr. Hayes questions whenever he visited. He seemed pleased by her interest and began leaving medical books for her to study. Elizabeth devoured them, reading late into the night by lamplight, fascinated by the intricacies of the human body and the treatments for various ailments. "You really love this," Caleb observed one evening watching her pore over an anatomy text. "I do. I never knew I could love learning something so much. Is that strange?" He leaned over and kissed the top of her head. "It is wonderful. You should pursue it if it makes you happy." So Elizabeth began apprenticing with Dr. Hayes, accompanying him on his rounds when ranch work allowed, learning to assist with childbirths and treat injuries and diagnose illnesses. The work was challenging and often heartbreaking, but it gave her a sense of purpose that went beyond her duties as a rancher's wife. She was helping people, using her hands and mind to ease suffering and save lives. Summer arrived with its usual intensity, and Elizabeth realized she had been in Arizona territory for exactly 1 year. So much had changed in that time. She had arrived with nothing, a desperate woman fleeing poverty and loneliness. Now she had a home, a husband she loved deeply, work that fulfilled her, and a place in the community. She thought about the Elizabeth who had stepped off that stagecoach clutching a Bible and nothing else, and she marveled at the distance she had traveled. It was in late August that she realized she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses had always been irregular, so she had not noticed at first, but other signs were becoming apparent. The fatigue, the way certain smells made her nauseous, the tenderness in her breasts. She waited another week to be sure before telling Caleb. She chose a quiet evening after supper when they were sitting on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Caleb, I have something to tell you." He turned to her immediately, hearing the seriousness in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right. I am pregnant." For a moment he just stared at her, and she saw a dozen emotions cross his face. Shock, joy, fear, wonder. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Elizabeth, oh Elizabeth, are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without Dr. Hayes confirming it, but I know my own body and I know what I am feeling." He pulled back enough to look at her face, his hands cradling her cheeks. "We are going to have a baby." "We are going to have a baby," she confirmed. And then they were both laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the enormousness of it. Dr. Hayes confirmed the pregnancy the following week and estimated that the baby would arrive in early March. Elizabeth continued her apprenticeship through the fall, though she was more careful now about not overtaxing herself. Caleb became almost comically protective, insisting she rest more and not lift anything heavy. She found his concern endearing even when it was excessive. Winter settled over the ranch, and Elizabeth's belly grew round. She sewed tiny clothes and blankets, preparing for the baby's arrival with meticulous care. Caleb built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, carving delicate patterns along the sides. They talked endlessly about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the future they were building for their child. The baby came in the first week of March 1880, a long, difficult labor that left Elizabeth exhausted but exhilarated. Dr. Hayes attended the birth, with Mrs. Patterson assisting. Caleb paced in the other room until Hayes finally called him in to meet his son. The baby was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. Caleb held him with infinite gentleness, tears streaming down his face. "He is beautiful, Elizabeth, he is so beautiful. What should we name him?" Elizabeth asked, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. Caleb thought for a moment, then said, "What was your father's name?" "Samuel." "Then let us call him Samuel, Samuel Stone." They fell into the rhythm of new parenthood, sleepless nights and endless feedings, the wonder of watching their son grow and change daily. Elizabeth had to curtail her work with Dr. Hayes for the first few months, but gradually she found a balance, taking Samuel with her on less urgent calls, teaching him to be calm around sickness and injury from his earliest days. The years passed in a blur of work and love and growth. The ranch prospered under Caleb's careful management, and they were able to hire permanent hands to help with the cattle. Elizabeth became known throughout the territory as a skilled midwife and healer, the woman to call when there was trouble. Samuel grew into a sturdy, curious boy who loved helping his father with the horses and following his mother on her medical calls. When Samuel was 3, Elizabeth gave birth to twin girls, Rose and Lily, who brought chaos and joy in equal measure. 2 years after that came another son, Thomas, named for the man whose death had inadvertently brought Elizabeth and Caleb together. The house was full of noise and life, children running through the rooms, dogs barking in the yard, friends and neighbors dropping by for meals and conversation. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb took Elizabeth back to the church where they had married. It was a quiet afternoon, and they were alone in the simple sanctuary. "Do you remember what I said to you the day we met?" Caleb asked, holding both her hands in his. "You said faith is a real fine start." "I was right." "Your faith brought you here, and my faith in you made me brave enough to tell you I was falling in love, and look what we have built together. A family, a home, a life that matters. All of it started with faith." Elizabeth looked at her husband, this good man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and had offered her not pity but partnership. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fear and desperation that had driven her to answer an advertisement from a stranger. She thought about stepping off that stagecoach with nothing but a Bible and the clothes on her back, certain she had reached the end of all possibilities. Faith was the start, she agreed. But love is what built everything else. Love for each other, for our children, for this land and these people. Faith opened the door, but love made it a home. Caleb kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 10 years of shared mornings and whispered conversations and hard-won triumphs. When they walked out of the church together, hand in hand, the Arizona sun was setting in glory, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The years continued their steady march. Samuel grew into a young man who combined his father's steady strength with his mother's compassion, eventually taking over more of the ranch management. The twins became inseparable partners in mischief, though Rose showed a talent for healing that rivaled her mother's, while Lily had her father's gift with horses. Young Thomas was the scholar of the family, always with his nose in a book, dreaming of becoming a lawyer. Elizabeth and Caleb watched their children grow with mingled pride and bittersweet awareness of time's passage. They were in their 40s now, with silver threading through their hair and lines around their eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But they were healthy and content, still reaching for each other in the night, still finding joy in simple moments. It was 1895 when Samuel announced his engagement to Mary Chen, the daughter of a Chinese merchant who had settled in Prescott after working on the railroads. There was some grumbling from narrow-minded neighbors, but Elizabeth and Caleb welcomed Mary with open arms. They had built their own lives on faith and love despite the odds, and they would not deny their son the same chance. The wedding was held at the ranch, a blending of traditions that reflected Mary's heritage and Samuel's, and Elizabeth cried happy tears as she watched her firstborn child commit himself to another person the way she and Caleb had done so many years ago. More grandchildren came in time. Samuel and Mary had 4 children. Rose married a young doctor who had come west to establish a practice, and they had 3. Lily wed a cavalry officer stationed at Fort Whipple, and Thomas eventually became a territorial judge and married a schoolteacher from back east. Elizabeth continued her healing work well into her 60s, only finally retiring when her hands began to shake too much to sew stitches reliably. Caleb remained active on the ranch until a fall from a horse at age 68 forced him to accept that he could no longer do everything he once had. But Samuel ran the ranch with skill and care, and Caleb was content to advise from the porch where he sat with Elizabeth in rocking chairs they had given each other for their 30th anniversary. It was there, on that porch on a summer evening in 1903, that Elizabeth and Caleb celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren had thrown them a party earlier in the day, but now it was just the 2 of them, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for decades. 40 years, Elizabeth said softly. It seems impossible. Best 40 years of my life, Caleb replied, reaching over to take her hand. His grip was not as strong as it once had been, but it was still steady, still sure. I meant what I said that first day, you know. Faith is a real fine start. But Elizabeth, you were so much more than a start. You were everything. Elizabeth felt tears prick her eyes. I was so frightened that day. Standing on that dusty street with nothing but a Bible and the dress I wore, no idea what would become of me. And then you appeared and offered me hope when I thought I had none left. You offered me something too, Caleb said. Purpose. I had built the ranch and thought that was enough, but then you arrived and I realized what was missing. Someone to build with, to share with, to love. You made me whole, Elizabeth. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars they had gazed at on countless nights over 40 years. The house behind them was quiet now that the party had ended, but it still held the echoes of laughter and music, the tangible presence of the family they had created together. Do you ever think about what would have happened if Thomas Brennan had not died? Elizabeth asked quietly. Caleb considered this. Sometimes, I think you would have made a good life with him. You are too strong and determined not to, but I am selfish enough to be grateful it worked out the way it did. I cannot imagine my life without you in it. I cannot imagine mine without you either. You know what I think about sometimes. That moment when you said faith is a real fine start. You saw me, really saw me, when I thought I was invisible. You saw past the desperation and the fear to the person underneath. That was the moment I began to believe I might survive here, and eventually it became the moment I began to live. Caleb brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. We have had a good life, you and I. The best life, Elizabeth agreed, full of love and work and purpose. Our children have grown into good people. Our grandchildren are healthy and happy. The ranch prospers. We have friends and community. What more could anyone ask for? Nothing, Caleb said firmly. This is everything. They sat together as the darkness deepened around them, two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something lasting. Elizabeth thought about that Bible she had carried so desperately, the physical symbol of a faith that was all she had to sustain her. That Bible sat now on the mantel inside, worn and cherished, a reminder of where she had started. But it was no longer all she had. Now she had a lifetime of memories, a family that stretched across generations, and a love that had only deepened with the passage of years. Caleb's voice broke the silence. What are you thinking about? Everything, nothing, how grateful I am, how blessed we have been. Amen to that, Caleb said softly. They remained on the porch until the moon rose, silver and full, casting its light over the land they had loved and tended for 40 years. Inside, the house waited, filled with the accumulation of a lifetime together. Photographs on the walls, quilts stitched by Elizabeth's hands, furniture built by Caleb, toys left behind by visiting grandchildren. Every object told a story, and every story was threaded through with love. When they finally went inside, Elizabeth retrieved her mother's Bible from the mantel. She opened it to the family record page where she had carefully recorded births and marriages and deaths over the years. Samuel Stone, born March 3, 1880. Rose and Lily Stone, born January 15, 1883. Thomas Stone, born August 22, 1885. And on, a growing family tree that had started with her and Caleb's marriage on that November day in 1879. Look at what we have made, she said, showing Caleb the page. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they looked at the record together. You arrived with faith and nothing else. Now look at the legacy we are leaving. All these lives that would not exist if you had not been brave enough to get on that stagecoach. If I had not been brave enough to tell you what was in my heart. Elizabeth leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. We were both brave. And we were both blessed. That night, as they lay in the bed they had shared for 40 years, Elizabeth thought about the full circle her life had taken. She had left Philadelphia an orphan with nothing, desperate and alone. She had arrived in Arizona territory expecting one life and had found another, better one waiting. She had loved and been loved. She had brought new life into the world and had saved lives with her healing work. She had built a home, raised children, and been part of a community. And it had all started with a cowboy who looked at a woman clutching a Bible with nothing else to her name, and said that faith was a real fine start. As she drifted off to sleep, safe in Caleb's arms, Elizabeth sent a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever providence had brought her to this place, this man, this life. She had started with faith, and faith had led her to love, and love had been enough to build a lifetime. The Arizona night settled softly around the ranch house, quiet except for the occasional lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the mesquite trees. Inside, Elizabeth and Caleb slept peacefully, two people who had taken a chance on each other and had been rewarded with more happiness than either had thought possible. Their story had started with desperation and unlikely circumstance, but it had become something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of faith and love to transform lives and create families and build legacies that would endure long after they were gone. In the morning, their grandchildren would come running to the porch again, demanding stories and cookies and attention. Samuel would consult with his father about ranch business. Rose would stop by with medicines she wanted her mother's opinion on. The house would fill with life and noise and love, the way it had for 40 years. But tonight, in the quiet darkness, it was just Elizabeth and Caleb, two people who had found each other when they both needed finding, who had built a life together from nothing but faith and determination and love that had grown stronger with every passing year. Their journey had not always been easy, but it had been theirs, and they had walked it together, hand in hand, from that first day on the dusty street in Prescott to this moment of peaceful completion. Faith had been the start, just as Caleb had said. But love had been the journey, and home had been the destination. And Elizabeth Stone, who had arrived in Arizona territory with nothing but a Bible and a desperate hope, now had everything that mattered. She had a family who loved her, a community that valued her, work that had meaning, and a husband who had been her partner and lover and best friend for 40 years. It was more than enough. It was everything. And as the stars wheeled overhead in the vast Arizona sky, two hearts beat in quiet rhythm, content and complete, a testament to the enduring power of faith and love to overcome any obstacle and create something beautiful from the most unlikely beginnings. Their story, which had started with an ending, with a dead man and a desperate woman and an act of kindness from a stranger, had become a beginning that had flowered into 40 years of shared joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, laughter and tears, and above all, love that had never faltered or failed. And that was exactly as it should be.